Hi guys, welcome back to the STEM Explorers YouTube channel. It's Shrikar, and today we're going to talk about how to choose parts to build your PC Consumer Edition. So I'm going to have timestamps of each each section or each part of the PC in the description. So if you're interested in learning about like a specific part, you can skip to that, or if you want to know about everything, just stick around and watch the whole video. So let's get into the first part, which is the CPU. Right, so CPU is often called the brain of the whole computer. It manages all the functions and all the data processing and whatnot. So there are two main competitors in the consumer market for CPUs. On the left, you can see that we have AMD, and on the right, we have a company called Intel. So let's start with AMD. AMD has lower clock speeds. Clock speeds are measured in gigahertz, right? So AMD generally is in the 3 to 4 gigahertz in terms of clock speeds, whereas Intel can also get into like 5.3 gigahertz or 5.4 depending if you get a good one. But back to AMD again. So we'll come back to how core clocks are like important and like how like the speeds can be very important for some people. So next we have more cores and more threads on the AMD side for less money. So basically the cores are like how many different like parts of the CPU, like how many cores there are in the CPU, which can manage different tasks. So the more cores and the more threads there are, essentially, it's better for productivity loads. So that's why AMD in almost any given price point for almost any CPU, they can beat the Intel CPU for productivity workloads. For example, CAD, photo editing, YouTube creation, like uploading and coding, a lot of other productivity based tasks, AMD will beat Intel in almost any situation, right? So next we have the smaller 7 nanometer 7 nanometer node and process. This is like the architecture that AMD uses. So it is significantly newer and more power efficient than the Intel counterpart, which is double the size at 14 nanometers. Right, and on AMD, they have the Ryzen 3, Ryzen 5, Ryzen 7, and Ryzen 9 series. Now, within each of these, like in the Ryzen 3, for example, there's a 3100 and the 3300X, and in the Ryzen 5, same thing, 3600, 3600X, Ryzen 7, you have even more, Ryzen 9, you have more, right? So they range from $100 for the Ryzen 3 3100 all the way up to $600-700 for like the Ryzen 9, depending on when you're buying it. So you have nice coverage of the whole market. No matter what price PC you're building, you have a good option from AMD. And I personally would say buy an AMD CPU if you're gonna do gaming and some productivity stuff on the side also. But now let's go to Intel. So Intel offers higher clock speeds. So now let's come back to the point where why higher clock speeds are important. Okay, so if you play games, right? Games only require 1 or 2 cores. So those 1 or 2 cores, which are significantly faster, as I said before, they can hit the 5 gigahertz mark compared to AMD, which stays in the 3 to 4. So if those individual cores are much faster, you can get more like FPS in games. So if you're a strict gamer and gaming is the only thing you do and you just like go on Chrome and stuff, then Intel is the best bet. But again, they have less cores and less threads for the money. So in productivity like things, they would lose in almost any almost any test, as I said before. But once again, they are significantly better for gaming. But AMD is also like getting to a point where they're catching up. But again, as of right now, the best one's Intel. As I alluded to before, the 14 nanometer like architecture, it's older, less power efficient, and so they have Celeron, i3, i5, i7, and i9. Celerons are like $50. i9s can cost $600-700 depending on when you buy them and like sales and whatnot. So I personally have an i7. But I started off with the Celeron as a temporary CPU, which is like $30-40 when I bought it. And then until I could find a good deal on the i7, which I eventually did, and then I swapped it out for an i7. So some people I have heard use the Celerons as like placeholders. So the next part is the board. This is where you put things like the CPU that we were talking about before, the cooler, the RAM, the GPU, fan connectors, SSD, SATA connections, and case wires, and many other things. Or for example, like M2 SSDs, this is where you put them into the motherboard. So Ryzen uses A320, A520, B350 all the way up to B550, and then X370 all the way up to X570. So the A series are the extreme low end. They're like $50-$60 motherboards, whereas the B series are like from the $80 to $150 price point based on the kind of features that you get in there. And then X series is anything over $150, and you can get like X470 and X570 boards all the way up to like $400-$500 for like high-end CPUs. So for the A series, I would really only recommend getting a Ryzen 3 CPU like the 3100 or the 3300X really, because these boards don't have much features. Their capacitors are not as high quality. The VRMs is not as high quality. Just the quality of the board is not as good as the B series or the X70s, and you can see that in the price point and the way it looks and the features that are clearly there. And I would recommend, like, the nice sweet spot right now is the B series really. You only really need like the X series if you're gonna like overclock your CPU, which basically means like increasing like the clock speed as we were talking about as we were talking about before, to make your CPU faster. So the B series is like the best board. I would say they have a pretty good like expandability. If you get like a higher end B series, you can get like some nice to haves like USB-C, faster Ethernet ports, more RAM slots, more M2 slots, and things like that. And then now let's go to the Intel side, right? Intel recently, just a couple weeks ago, I believe, came out with LGA 1200. LGA 1200 is their new platform for their new CPUs, their 10th gen CPUs, and they use the Z490 board. And before that, if you go back like over a month, the boards and CPUs that used to exist then, the CPUs were on the LGA 1151 socket, and they use Z370 and Z390 for the higher end boards, and the lower end boards were the H series. So what the 1200 and like the 1151 means is the number of pins on the CPU and pin holes in the socket. So as you can see on this board below the text box, in the center there's a place where you put the CPU, and in there would either be 1200 pins or 1151 pins. So these two CPUs and boards are not cross compatible, so always make sure that you're checking. And in the future, when Ryzen eventually does come out with a new socket, but they still have not yet, you will also need to check then. So just make sure that you're always checking that your board and CPU are compatible, because you will have big problems and you will and can damage your parts. So the next major part is a GPU. This is the graphics performance unit. This handles things in like when you're playing games and in certain like productivity things. The GPU can take strain off the CPU, or you need a GPU to do certain things, for example in CAD. So AMD also makes GPUs, and then we have like Nvidia as your competitor. So let's start with Nvidia. Nvidia has options ranging, at least for like RTX, from $300 to $2,500. So let me explain RTX first. RTX is basically like ray tracing. Ray tracing is essentially 8 light rays bouncing off triangles which the game developer has created, right? So or polygons necessarily. So each object in a game has polygons, and then they bounce like light rays off of it to have a more like realistic view of it. An easy example of this is like Minecraft, right? If you know what Minecraft is, it's very block-like and it's a very simple game. It's easy for computers to run. Lately, they came out with like the version with like RTX. Just search up a picture, watch like a demo. The difference is just like astounding, right? It looks so realistic. Like the water looks different, the sky looks different. That's what like RTX does. So the cheapest Nvidia option with RTX is $300. But there are cheaper GPUs which Nvidia does still produce, which are called the 16 series, so 1650, 1660, 1660 Ti, like etc. So those don't have RTX, and those are in like the $150 to $300 price point. Those fill that gap, and all of them use GDDR6 for their buses, and they all support G-Sync, and basically they are coming out with new GPUs this September or this late August is what is like alleged. You can take that with like a grain of salt, and I mean like you truly like don't know anything until the manufacturer publicly says something. but it is very, very likely, as like when we talk about like AMD, you'll see why that's likely, right? So AMD is also like going to come out with new GPUs by the end of this year, and that has been confirmed. And AMD is confirmed by the manufacturer that they're going to be making high-end GPUs. And if they make high-end GPUs, Nvidia will have to compete, and therefore Nvidia will have to put out new cards. Basically, like almost guaranteeing by the end of this year we'll have new GPUs from both companies, which is a great thing to see competition in like any market, really. So back to the more specifics on like AMD GPUs. So AMD has more lower end options. So in the sub $100 price point to 150, right? They have the 500 series, 550, 560, 570, and 580. I believe they also have 590 at this point, but these are outdated, and so the architecture which these are built on, as I talked about, like the 14 nanometer like node and architecture and CPUs, these also have a similar like architecture system, and that came out in 2016. It is very old, as the Nvidia one came out in 2018. So as these are old, they are getting much cheaper on the used market and even on the new market, and that's called Polaris. The architecture name is Polaris. And then on the higher end in AMD, we have the 5500 XT to the 5700 XT. So these are newer, but these still use the same like Polaris like architecture, which came out in 2016. So I mean, are they new? Kind of. Are they faster? Yeah, for sure. But AMD can really only compete until the $450 price point, because they don't have anything faster than that or more expensive than that. So anything above that, the only option is like Nvidia, right? So next, like the 500 series uses lower end a GDDR5 buses, and the higher end ones uses GDDR6, which are faster and they're the same as Nvidia. And these GPUs from AMD support FreeSync. So next, let's talk about what FreeSync and G-Sync is in terms of GPUs, right? So FreeSync and G-Sync basically take away screen tearing. As you can see, screen tearing is rather difficult to explain at times, but you can see in the off and on for AMD FreeSync how it's tearing. Like when it's tearing, they're literally being like cut apart and it doesn't look proper. So what the GPU does is, if you have like an Nvidia GPU, Nvidia makes G-Sync panels. They work with panel makers for monitors like Dell, or in this case like the laptop company here, to make their screens of the laptop work well with Nvidia GPU, so screen tear does not exist. Same thing for AMD. So if you're planning on gaming or doing something where you're gonna need where like something's gonna be moving fast on the screen, I would recommend that you pick up a monitor which is compatible with your GPU. Not necessarily that they're compatible, but if you are going to game and you're getting like an Nvidia GPU, make sure that you get a G-Sync monitor if you care about that. And same thing goes for AMD. So next, let's talk about storage. Storage is also very important, but the amount of storage that you get is kind of up to you. You need to know how many photos or games you're going to store, how many accounts you're going to have on your computer, etc. So first, we have hard drives. Hard drives are good for storing photos, movies, and like large applications and like large games. Like an example would be COD. That takes like 250 GB for a game. That's a big game. And if you do play it, I would not recommend that you put that like on like an SSD unless you have a lot of like SSD storage, right? And these are very, very cheap. It's like 2 terabytes is like $50, but they're not very fast. And again, as I said, like large capacities for very low prices. And these are also very commonly used in servers. So I really don't know much about servers. I'm not like a specialist. I haven't built a server, but basically you can use hard drives. If one fails, you can create a system where if 1 or 2 drives were to fail, they would rebuild the data on that drive onto another drive. And because these drives are so cheap, these are generally used for those kind of applications. So next, we have SATA SSDs. These are used as a boot drive. I would recommend any computer being built has at least a small 120 GB SATA SSD just to load your like operating system off of, whether that be Windows or like Ubuntu or anything else. And I would also put like your most commonly used games or like applications on this. So if you have small games like Minecraft or like Fortnite or commonly used applications like CAD, like Autodesk Inventor or 3ds Max for small things, put them on these, because you'll be like accessing that data more often, and the faster it is, the more time it's going to save you. So yeah, that's what I do with the applications and game that I use. They are more expensive than normal hard drives. So next we have the like these are very fast SSDs. These are called like NVMe SSDs. The reason why these are faster is that they have a direct link with the CPU, so they can offer much faster read speeds, and you can also put data on them much faster. But they're also significantly more expensive at sometimes compared to SATA SSDs, but you can use them for the same purposes as SATA SSDs also. I personally have all three kinds actually. I use the SATA SSD as my boot drive, my NVMe SSD as a game drive, and then my normal 4 TB drive for photos and like larger games. So next, let's move on to cooling. Cooling is very important, as you could probably see. You need to cool your CPU, right? Otherwise it's going to overheat and it's not going to work. So on the lower end CPUs, you can use like air cooling, as you can see one in the top by Cooler Master. So for i3s, i5s, Ryzen 3, and like the Ryzen 5s. The Ryzens actually already come with CPU coolers with them. Those generally do the job if you're not gonna like overclock them. But if you don't like the way they look, or if you buy like an Intel CPU without one, which is like an i3 or an i5, would just pick up like a normal like air cooler. But if you care a bit more about aesthetics, or you have an i9 or like an i7 or like a Ryzen 7 or like a Ryzen 9, or even certain types of the i5 which are fast and which take up a lot of heat, I would get like an AIO, or like what's called an all-in-one cooler. Basically, it's a pump on the CPU which pumps warm liquid away from the CPU to a radiator, which will cool that liquid, send it back to the CPU, and then that process keeps on continuing to keep the CPU cool. I personally have an AIO system. I mean aesthetically it looks better, at least to me. And I also have like an i7, and sometimes it is at 100% like usage, my CPU, so it does take up like a significant amount of like heat and power, so it is useful then. And then there's custom loops, right? Custom loops are extremely complex, can be very expensive, and can take a lot of time. And to be frank, I would not like tell anyone to do it as a first time, second time builder. For sure, it's a very expensive and difficult thing, as I said before. So generally, if you're doing a hard tubing PC custom loop, use a heat gun to bend plastic tubes to fit in your system. And then you have GPU blocks to cool your GPU, so you don't use a stock cooler on your GPU. You need to get a CPU water block, you need to get a pump, a tank. It's very expensive. I mean, just those parts alone could be $1,000 or $1,500 if you get nice quality parts and you're also doing your GPU custom loop. I would obviously don't do that unless you know what you're doing, because if you get water on any of your parts, they're broken for sure. So I would not, don't do that. So next, let's go on to RAM. So RAM, we are on the refresh of a new RAM in about 6 months to 1 year. Currently, we have DDR4, and new RAM coming out is like a big thing because it doesn't happen very often, like every 5 years, maybe 4 or 5 years. And when it does happen, there's a significant improvement in performance. So 1 year is a while depending on the way you look at it. In technology, things are always like evolving, so you can't always stay with what's the latest and greatest, right? So let's talk about what we can and what we know now. So Ryzen gets better performance with faster RAM. So they're determined on the hertz, as I said before. So Intel does not improve much with faster RAM. So like Ryzen's CPUs use something called like Infinity Fabric. It's a very complex thing to like understand, but essentially the CPU is built in a way where faster RAM in dual channel can really actually like improve the performance. Like you can see a significant performance like increase if using faster RAM. And what I mean by dual channel is, right, you can get like RAM up to 8 sticks, or you can get them down to all the way to like 1 stick. So you can put 16 GB just on 1 stick. That's not okay with Intel or Ryzen actually, because you should always split the number into 2 sticks, even if it costs more. So let's say that you need 8 GB RAM. Don't buy 1 stick of 8 GB. Buy 2 sticks of 4 GB, because that's gonna, like, that change itself is gonna make like all the difference in games and like applications and whatnot. So for Intel, I would recommend 2666 or 2400. But for AMD, I believe the cap is 3833 or something like that. So I would recommend 3600 if you can afford it. Or for $10 or $20 cheaper, generally you can get 3200. But yeah, 3600 is a significant improvement in terms of FPS for Ryzen if you're playing games compared to 2666. So next we have cases. In cases, it is mainly up to how much you want to spend, what nice to have features you want to have, and how much you care about like the aesthetics over functionality, right? So, but there are some like standardized things. For example, the size of your board, corresponds with what size case that you have to buy. So ATX cases are standard. ATX cases and boards are generally standard size. Then eATX cases are a bit wider than ATX. Basically, they're used in more server applications or for higher end boards and higher end CPUs. So, I mean, it's not the consumer market. And then there's micro ATX and then MITX. Micro ATX is a smaller version of the ATX in like width and height. And then you have mini ITX. Mini ITX, even though it is significantly smaller than everything, actually costs more than even ATX and micro ATX. And I would not recommend doing a MITX build, as it's very difficult. You have way less like upgradability, and unless you really need to have a small form factor case, as you can see on the right in the picture, and you need to store it in a small area, do not get like an MITX case. It's very difficult to build in. The board is also very small to work with. So micro ATX and ATX are like what I would say that you should build in, and then eATX doesn't really apply, as I said earlier. And then like some nice to haves which cases have these days are like tempered glass side panels. They have like RGB built in, as you could see on my PC in the first slide. They have USB-C on the motherboard, pre-installed fans, thumb screws, dust filters. So nice to haves. And again, it comes down to like aesthetics, right? Do you want to put functionality over form or form over functionality? Like, what do you like? How much do you want to spend? Just watch like a case, like search up your case on YouTube and just watch like something about it to make sure it's still functionally, it is still good. If you're going after form, just make sure functionally it's still good. Because I mean, on this slide, like some cases can get pretty expensive. Here you see one for $260, but you can get ones which are also $30. So really do like your take the time to search up your cases, make sure that they're good cases. And yeah, cases are difficult to change later on because you need to swap out your whole computer. So next we have fans. Fans are a very important part. Some people, they don't calculate that into their budget and whatnot. They don't think fans are like important. Like, oh, my case comes with one, or like my cooler has enough fans. Like, they're not enough. You're gonna need more fans, or you're gonna need like fans later on, because the case fans often are not very good. So they come in various speeds. Some go like 11,000 RPMs for server. Some are 1,000 if you want them to be quiet. So it really depends on your use case and application, right? So I recommend Be Quiet and the Corsair fans if you like RGB, and then Be Quiet and Noctua for performance. So the one on the right is from Be Quiet. Even though it's not as flashy as the one on the left, it does perform better and it's quieter. So again, this is one of those things like form over functionality. How much do you care about that? And then also the Be Quiet one is probably half the price per fan compared to the Corsair one, depending on when you're shopping for these. So it's kind of like the case conversation again. Like, do you care about the way it looks, right? So next we have power supplies. Power supplies are extremely, extremely important. Never skimp out on power supplies, please, because if you ever heard stories of them blowing up or something, or I'm telling you now, they do blow up if you get bad ones and then you try to like overload them. There will be damage done and stuff. So always go extra on a power supply. The power supply is the one place it is okay to go extra on and spend more on. It is valid, and your concerns are valid over the power supply, right? So I would recommend the companies that you see on the left. The top ones are the ones that I would like recommend the most. Antec and Roseville are a bit less known, but yeah, Silverstone's also a very good brand. And then sizes, so there's also sizes to power supplies. You have ATX and then the small, and then after that, like the small form factor sizes. So ATX is standard, and then small form factor is if you're building in a small form factor case. Yeah, I would just get like an ATX power supply if you can. It's like you get more ports and more power options. Yeah, and it's just generally they're higher. Like you can plug more stuff into them also. And then how good are they, right? Like what are they certified at? 80 plus, 80 plus bronze, all the way up to like 80 plus titanium. I personally have a 750 watt 80 plus gold power supply, but you can get away with like an 80 plus or like an 80 plus like silver like certified one. Those are also like pretty good enough. So to calculate how many watts your computer would take, I would just search up calculator for my PC part, like temperature and like how like just search up like a power supply calculator for PC, and you go and then you like get them from multiple different brands, and you can just plug in like your part. Like you can plug in like i7 and like 2080 from Nvidia and like etc, how many drives you have, and then it'll tell you how many, and then it'll tell you like what kind of power supply to get, like what certification is the best and like whatnot. And then next we have the peripherals. So here you can see like the monitors. There are many kinds, right? 144 hertz, 4K, ultra wide, G-Sync, Freesync, like USB-C, 240 hertz also, 300 hertz for some reason. So if you are just like if you want like a nice monitor, like around 150 200, I mean like just to play games and do some basic schoolwork, I would recommend a 1080p 144 hertz monitor. But again, depending on your profession, or if you need something specialized, like if you need to maybe you need like an ultra wide monitor because you're like looking at timelines or something, if you're making like YouTube, so I would get like an ultra wide. Or if you need to do like color calibration or like photo editing, I would get like a color accurate monitor, which is certified by someone like Calman or Pantone. So, and then there's also features like G-Sync and Freesync. So this is kind of depending on what you need your monitor for. And then next we have the peripherals. So mice, keyboards, macro pads, microphones, mouse pads, etc. So this is really like you need to try it, and then you need to like try multiple and like determine like what's best for you, right? So near where I live, we have something called Micro Center. They don't have many locations in America, but what they do is they have these long sections with keyboards, mice, headphones that you can try out. Like you can try out dozens of keyboards, and you can try like which one which one that you like the best, so then you can make like a smart purchasing decision. Same thing with like Best Buy. Some Best Buys have like a couple options, so I would try them out if you can before you buy them, because some of them can be expensive. Like keyboards can range from 100 to 200 if you're building custom ones, even more. So try it out if you can, and do some like go to YouTube, search up the model that you're like finding like interesting, and then yeah, try to find it in store if possible and try it out. So next, here are some tips, right? So I would use an anti-static band. They're only like $1 or $2, and it's not worth the risk to like statically like shock your PC or whatever. Like it has happened, it can happen, and you can damage your parts. Like if you're building on carpet, like if you're standing on carpet, you could like damage your parts that way. It's only a couple dollars. I would get it and just like deal with it. And then I would also recommend a magnetics part tray. You can keep all your screws and like bolts or whatever in there while you're building, so you don't like lose parts, because often your board or your case may not come with extra parts, and then you don't want to go out of your way to try and source them or buy them or whatnot. And then be careful with your be careful with these parts. There's some parts which you should not be touching, like on the GPU, the connector you should not be touching. The the back side of the CPU with the pins you really shouldn't be touching. And touching like the RAM sticks on the connectors, you should not be touching there either, because your finger like oils will damage the connections, and there's a lot of other like reasons and whatnot in different places. So when you're building your PC, I would be watching like a live tutorial, like while you're like currently building it. Like just watch something on the side to make sure that you don't damage your parts. And so this is my PC. This is like my monitors, my setup and everything. So I have an i7. I would recommend buying Ryzen now, but when I built it 2 years ago, Ryzen was just just coming out, and I didn't like really like trust it yet fully. But now it's a very good brand. I would like say yeah, go with Ryzen. I just have a pretty standard Asus Z390E board, 16 GB RAM, a Corsair H115i Platinum cooler. It's just a cool like AIO cooler. I like the way it looks. It also performs like super well. Then my boot drive is a 256 GB SSD. My game drive, as I said before, is a 1 TB drive, and then I have a 4 TB hard drive for files and photos. And then I have a 750 watt EVGA Gold certified power supply. And then my case, as you can see, is a Fantex Enthoo Evolve ATX tempered glass case. It's a pretty nice case. I really like it. And then peripherals, right? I have the HyperX Alloy Cherry MX Brown keyboard. It's pretty good. I like it. It has some nice tab features like has like RGB and whatnot. And then I have a Corsair double extended pad. And then I have 2 monitors, one for gaming, one for CAD and like photo editing and like those kinds of things. So my gaming one's a Dell 1440p 144Hz monitor, and I have a BenQ PD2700U 4K monitor. So that's my computer basically. And so some sources / places I would go like online. So I would recommend like the Linus Tech Tips like channel, or I mean I personally just like them, but if you just search up on YouTube like how to build a PC tutorials, they will take you step by step, very in depth on how to build one. And then I would recommend camel.com to price check like Amazon products and to track the price history to know if you're buying at the low end or if you're buying when it's too high, to know how low or high it's been before, and to see what third party like people are like also like offering it for. And then I would also use PCPartPicker.com to organize your parts list and to shop for parts, because what PCPartPicker.com essentially does is, right, it goes to multiple websites like Amazon, Newegg, and like Micro Center and all these stores, and it like compiles them into one area, and then you can add the parts at the lowest price from each store basically, and then you can see where like the lowest price is. Basically like a nice database which has everything with like a live price updates and everything. I love it. I use it to build, like if my friends want to have like a PC and they ask me for like a PC part list, I just build it on there, then I like share it with them so they can see where like the lowest price is at the store and everything. So it's a really like clean and easy way to do that. Well, thanks for watching. That's the whole thing. Please like and subscribe and check out my other things on my YouTube channel. And yeah, go to the description for the timestamps. And yeah, thank you for checking out my channel.